Many women in Russia are rushing to marry soldiers headed to the front lines. All they pray for is that he comes back fast, but in a coffin, not alive. Sounds like a one-off case, but this has become one of the fastest growing trends in Russia. Thousands of women are now using disturbingly cheap, sinister tactics to trap soldiers into marriage. They have a weird identity. Some people call them the Black Widows. Military blogger Anastasia Keshevarova and other pro-war commentators have documented what they call the Luhansk honey trap. These are organized operations concentrated in the rear areas of occupied cities like Luhansk and Donetsk. These cities function as rotation hubs where soldiers cycle back from the front lines, often shell-shocked and exhausted. Groups of women, sometimes working in organized gangs, frequently visit restaurants and bars near military bases. Their targets are specific: servicemen who appear lonely or estranged from their families back in Russia, men who seem vulnerable to the promise of connection. The goal is always the same: secure a marriage registration as fast as humanly possible. Under wartime conditions, Russia has waived the standard 1-month waiting period for marriage, allowing couples to marry on the same day that they meet. Once that marriage is registered, the woman becomes the primary legal beneficiary. And now the only thing she hopes for is his death. The sooner the better. The story of Sergei Kondolsko could explain why they do this. He was a 40-year-old from Bryansk Oblast. He enlisted in October of 2023, and right after that, almost immediately, he married a woman named Elena Sokolova. When he was killed in combat, she stepped forward, not in grief, but to collect what she had married him for. But then things fell apart. When the court started digging into it, they discovered the marriage was completely fake. Sergei's own family testified that they had never even met the supposed bride. They were absolutely shocked to find out that he had gotten married at all. The judge ended up invalidating the marriage posthumously and fined Sokolova 3,000 rubles, which is only about $37. Elena's plan failed. Because just a few days after Sergei's funeral, Sokolova claimed widow's benefits amounting to at least $200,000, an amount that could have lasted her a lifetime in Russia. Now, you may ask, how do these women even find out which men are going to the front lines? Well, by using a professionally cheap and sophisticated method. And the one who is using it isn't the single woman, but an organized criminal network who knows the secret. In the Khanty-Mansi region, investigators uncovered a Black Widow operation, where they weren't just looking for any soldiers, they were specifically hunting single men with criminal records or addiction problems, people whose families might not fight too hard for compensation money. This particular group collected at least $160,000 in death benefits from multiple fraudulent marriages before the authorities caught on. They somehow knew exactly where to find these men. When authorities investigated, they found the secret. The gang somehow had access to actual police databases to identify and target their victims. The scam has become mainstream for a long time, and the government knows this very well. Everyone is angry about these dirty tactics, everyone except the people getting insanely rich from them. And no, I don't mean the women, unfortunately. The real money is being made on the other side. So much that the money these women make starts looking like peanuts in front of them. They are the military commanders. But how do military commanders profit from something that is entitled for widows? Sometimes the very money these soldiers are promised, the payouts they risked everything for, never actually make it into their hands, because they're robbed by their own commanders. One serviceman shared his story with the BBC, describing how his entire unit was cut off from accessing shops and then ordered to do something almost unthinkable: hand over their bank cards along with their PIN numbers to a sergeant major. This wasn't a request, it was an order. That officer allegedly ended up holding 50 salary cards in his possession, many of them belonging to soldiers who are now listed as missing in action, men who can no longer speak up or demand their money back. According to the soldier who came forward, the sergeant major simply fled with the money, disappearing with cards that reportedly held up to 2 million rubles each. Another soldier, Nikita Kursa, decided to fight back. He reported the 2 officers who stole from him directly to the police, and the authorities actually took action. The officers were charged with robbery and abuse of power. This creates a sick standoff. Families desperately need their loved ones declared dead to get the lump sum and survive. Commanders need that soldier to stay officially alive to keep draining his salary. Grieving widows are caught in the middle, unable to mourn, unable to pay bills, forced into legal warfare against an institution profiting from their loss. And this corruption goes straight to the top. In 2024, Major General Ivan Popov was sentenced to 5 years for stealing 1,700 tons of metal meant to build fortifications protecting his own troops. He literally sold off his soldiers' defenses for personal profit. If a general is looting the walls meant to save lives, what stops a commander from stealing a dead private's paycheck? But at least that was 100 times more human than what the other commanders do for money. Wives and mothers in Russia formed volunteer groups, spending hours scrolling Ukrainian telegram channels with names like Cargo 200, Soviet code for dead bodies. They're searching through photos of corpses looking for tattoos or anything to identify their loved ones, desperate for proof they can use in court, all because of a sin, what Russians now call the search epidemic. Evidence shows that commanders are actively refusing body exchanges with Ukraine, because no body means no payment, and that monthly salary keeps flowing. The refusal to return bodies has created what Russians now call the search epidemic. Even if these bodies do come back, the forensic lab in Rostov-on-Don is so overwhelmed that DNA results take months. A joint investigation in July of 2025 uncovered something even darker. Commanders started reclassifying missing soldiers as deserters. A man disappears during combat, likely killed. And instead of honoring him, the military labels him as someone who abandoned his post. That single word change, deserter instead of casualty, eliminates all family compensation. Investigators found this happening in at least 25 units across 11 regions. Approximately 50,500 Russian soldiers were officially recorded as deserters in 2024 and charged with evading military service, according to OSINT Group, for intelligence insight cited by iStories. Meanwhile, Russia's official death count is frozen in fantasy. The last admission came in September of 2022, just under 6,000 soldiers killed. They haven't updated that number since, even as court records prove tens of thousands are missing or dead. When pressed, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said casualty information is a state secret. Translation, we're never going to tell you the truth. So the real Black Widow isn't wearing a wedding dress. It's wearing a uniform, and it's been feeding on Russian families since the war began. Not only the military, but the state government is also robbing the families of dead soldiers. Natalia Kuzmina is a mother of 10 from the Tambov region. Her husband died in the war. The government had been making these big promises about coffin money, substantial death benefits for families. But when Kuzmina went to collect, the state refused to pay. They hid behind bureaucratic technicalities, vague excuses about her husband's unit status, about the circumstances of his death. Instead of the millions they had promised, the regional government offered her museum tickets, kindergarten discounts, and utility subsidies. Think about that for a second. When she went public asking for help, the propaganda machine kicked in. Online commentators attacked her, said she had too many children, called her greedy, and accused her of trying to profit from the war. And right there you can see the real purpose of the Black Widow narrative. It's a tool. The state uses it to discredit any widow who asks for what she's owed, painting grieving women as opportunists so they can justify keeping the money. This isn't just happening to Kuzmina. It's happening across Russia. And it follows the same pattern every time. A soldier goes to Ukraine and stops responding. His wife or mother contacts the military unit. They get vague answers, contradictions, nothing useful. Months go by, and eventually she's traveling to morgues near Ukraine, trying to identify bodies herself because nobody's helping her. The actual family members get trapped in one of three ways. Either the military declares the soldier a deserter, which immediately cuts off all benefits, or they list him as missing, which puts families in permanent limbo, and they can't access death benefits because he's not confirmed dead, and can't move on because there's no closure, or they make the family go through months of court proceedings to get him legally declared dead before releasing any money. And here's the thing, this hits the poorest regions the hardest. Tuva, Buryatia, Dagestan, these places sent the most soldiers per capita, lost the most men relative to their populations, and now their families are getting blocked by the same system that recruited them. In many cases, military authorities aren't just unhelpful, they're actively working against these families. There's a case documented by iStories where a widow was told her husband voluntarily left his unit, even though his body had already been recovered and buried. The military refused to change his status, even after death. That's not bureaucracy, that's deliberate obstruction. Since the invasion began in February of 2022, over 125,000 Russian soldiers have been confirmed killed by independent investigators, with BBC Russian and Mediazona as of August 2025. Western intelligence estimates place total Russian casualties at more than 1.1 million, including both wounded and killed. In 2024 alone, approximately 430,000 Russian troops were lost through death and injury, exceeding the combined losses of both 2022 and 2023. As for the wounded, military analysts estimate that for every soldier killed, 3 to 4 more are injured. There is no precise independent number for Russian POWs available, but based on this ratio and Western defense estimates, somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million Russian soldiers have been wounded since February of 2022. Right now, 63,000 Russian soldiers are officially listed as missing. That's almost 63,000 families stuck in this nightmare, searching for answers that may never come. The process of identifying bodies has become its own disaster. Russia has performed 48,000 DNA tests just to identify military remains as of December 2024. Bodies come back so badly damaged from artillery strikes, drone attacks, missile fire, the DNA analysis from bone fragments is often the only option. This takes months, leaving families who just want to bury their dead waiting indefinitely. A martyred soldier deserves a lot of respect, but in Russia, they have a price tag. One Russian economist broke down what a soldier's death is actually worth, and the figures are staggering. A 35-year-old man who serves for just 1 year and dies in combat generates approximately 14.5 million rubles for his family, somewhere between $150,000 and $180,000. That's roughly 20 times the average annual salary in Russia, and more money than most men in Russia's poorest regions would earn working as civilians until they turn 60. Let's break down where this money comes from, because it's not just from one payment. The federal government provides 5 million rubles in death compensation, a figure Putin established by decree back in March of 2022. Then come the regional supplements, which vary wildly depending on which oblast you're from, potentially adding millions more to the total. On top of that, soldiers earn combat salaries of up to 5.2 million rubles in their first year alone, dramatically higher than anything they could make in civilian life. If they're wounded before they die, there's another 3 million rubles in injury compensation. Add in additional insurance payouts based on rank and circumstances, and you start to see how the number climbs to 14 million rubles or more. For women living in Russia's most economically devastated regions, places where poverty rates were already 28 to 30% even before the war, this isn't just a big number. This is generational, life-changing wealth. This is the reality for millions of women in Russia's poorest regions, places like Tuva, Buryatia, Dagestan, and the Altai Republic. These aren't just statistics on a map. They're communities where poverty has become the norm, where opportunity feels like distant dreams reserved for those living in glittering cities far away. In Tuva alone, about 34% of residents were living below the poverty line in 2022, making it the poorest region in all of Russia. Nearly 7% were in extreme poverty, struggling to meet even the most basic needs for survival. Now compare that to Moscow, where the average monthly wage in 2024 soared past 160,000 rubles. Or Chukotka in the Arctic, where workers brought home around 185,000 rubles each month. The contrast isn't just striking, it is staggering. In Tuva, the average person scrapes by on about 20,000 rubles a month, placing it near the very bottom of Russia's 85 regions. In Ingushetia, which recorded the lowest average wage in 2024, workers earned around 4,000 rubles monthly. Meanwhile, across much of the south, the Caucasus, and the Volga regions, places like Dagestan, Chechnya, Kalmykia, and Ingushetia, many people earn less than 30,000 rubles a month, with roughly half the population falling below even that modest threshold. The wealthiest regions in Russia earn 4 to 5 times what the poorest regions do. And that gap hasn't always existed, it widened dramatically between 2021 and 2024. While the national poverty rate hovers around 8 to 9% according to official statistics, those numbers are calculated using an extremely low poverty line, masking the true depth of hardship in these foreign corners of the country. 2/3 of all Russians earn less than 40,000 rubles a month. But the top 1%, concentrated mostly in Moscow and a handful of wealthy regions, enjoy average incomes ranging from 128,000 to 350,000 rubles monthly. Drop a war contract into that equation. Suddenly the numbers shift in ways that seem almost unreal. In Karachay-Cherkessia, a regional military sign-up bonus of 1.6 million rubles represents 68 times the average monthly income of just 23,400 rubles. For someone in these regions, war bonuses and combat pay can easily reach 200,000 to 300,000 rubles in a single month, money that dwarfs what they normally earn in half a year. Over the course of 1 year of service, payments can exceed 5 million rubles, an amount so vast it's almost incomprehensible to families who've spent generations counting every ruble. Russian central bank's own data reveals household bank deposits in regions like Tuva exploded by 45 to 53% between 2022 and 2023, while wealthier areas like Magadan saw just 3% growth. In Buryatia, deposits shot up by 81% from January of 2022 to November of 2024. To put this in perspective, in places like the Republic of Tuva or Buryatia, the average monthly salary hovers around 50 to 60,000 rubles. That 14 million ruble death payout represents 30 to 40 years of average earnings. A soldier's death generates immediate capital equivalent to an entire lifetime of labor. This death boom is reshaping local economies, driving inflation in housing and automobile markets. The Kremlin created this system deliberately, facing the need to maintain recruitment levels without declaring a politically dangerous second wave of general mobilization. They've monetized participation in the war to an extreme degree, creating a massive disparity between what a living Russian male is worth in a depressed region and what the state assigns as the value of his death. And that's where these women, they call the Black Widows, see their opportunity. These Black Widow operations range from lone opportunists to sophisticated criminal networks, and the level of organization is chilling. At the simplest end, you have individual women using social media platforms, VK in particular, which is essentially Russia's version of Facebook. Groups with names like Dates with Soldiers have become digital hunting grounds, where vulnerable, lonely men heading to the front lines are targeted with promises of companionship and connection. But this is just the entry level of a much darker ecosystem. In fact, some schemes involve outright collusion with military recruitment personnel, people inside the system who facilitate these arrangements. The only people who get butchered in this are the real loved ones, the ones who actually deserve the compensation. After a soldier from Tyumen was killed in action, his mother came forward with serious accusations against his widow, claiming the whole marriage had been orchestrated as a scam. The local Siberian media covered it extensively, and it really highlighted this painful dynamic that's emerging. Biological families having to fight these so-called Black Widows in court over death benefits. It's become this ugly intergenerational battle, with mothers and siblings forced to prove that their sons or brother was manipulated into a sham marriage. When the soldier is killed, and given the attrition rates and assault units, this is a high probability outcome, the widow claims the full state payout, leaving the soldier's parents or children from previous relationships with absolutely nothing. These fraudsters are exploiting a specific weakness in Russian legal provisions that automatically entitle widows to compensation without extensive vetting. The administrative system has been functioning efficiently, sometimes paying out benefits before families even know their son or husband has died, let alone that he got married to a stranger days before deployment. These operations don't even wait for the soldier to die. Russian soldiers in combat zones rarely have access to ATMs or banking apps, so they routinely leave their salary cards with wives or girlfriends, or share their login credentials for banking apps like Sberbank Online. Predatory partners drain these accounts every single month. There are documented reports of soldiers at the front lines who can't buy basic supplies like food or body armor because their accounts have been completely emptied by partners sitting comfortably in the rear. They're being robbed in real time while risking their lives. Perhaps the most sophisticated fraud involves what is called the posthumous bride strategy, exploiting recent legislative changes from 2024. Russia passed laws allowing the legal recognition of factual marriage, essentially common law arrangements, if the soldier died in the special military operation. The intention was noble, to protect women who had been in genuine long-term relationships but never formalized their marriage. But fraudsters have weaponized this provision. Women now appear after the soldier's death, armed with witnesses and falsified evidence of cohabitation, filing lawsuits to be recognized as the legal wife. This effectively strips inheritance from the soldier's parents or actual estranged spouses, triggering vicious court battles over that 14 million ruble prize. The Russian state has tried to regulate this chaos, though their efforts have been limited and poorly targeted. In January of 2024, they signed Federal Law No. 40 FZ, introducing stricter requirements for foreigners marrying Russian citizens to obtain residency. The law was primarily aimed at migration control, making it harder for non-Russian nationals, in particular Central Asian migrants, to use marriage to a soldier as a dual pathway to both citizenship and potential death benefits. But here's the problem. Most Black Widow operations involve Russian citizens exploiting other Russian citizens. So these migration-focused measures do almost nothing to stop the domestic predatory marriages that are driving this phenomenon. Russian military courts have been flooded with unprecedented waves of cases, and the pattern is impossible to ignore. Back in 2022, these courts handled just dozens of cases declaring soldiers missing or dead. what amounted to routine paperwork in peacetime. But then 2024 arrived, and suddenly those same courts were drowning in over 22,400 cases, all demanding official death declarations. But here's where it gets darker. These court filings aren't just administrative housekeeping. They're creating opportunities for something called Black Widow fraud, and it's spreading like wildfire. The moment a soldier is officially declared dead, massive compensation packages start flowing to families, and that's when the predators emerge. And here's the final piece that confirms this isn't a conspiracy theory, it's an official government policy now. In August of 2024, the Russian State Duma introduced specific legislation targeting Black Widow fraud. While the Kremlin points fingers at these women for scamming the state itself is running a fraud so massive, it makes any individual scheme look like nothing. And the real victims? The very families Russia claims to honor. The whole scam hinges on one brutal trick. To receive the 14 million ruble death benefit, you need a body and a death certificate. So when a soldier dies, the military simply doesn't just declare him dead. They classify him as missing in action instead. Bez vesti propavsky, in Russian meaning missing without a trace. No body, no certificate, no payout. It's theft dressed up as paperwork. In 2024, Russian courts were flooded with over 20,000 lawsuits, from families fighting to get the government to acknowledge what they already know, that their husbands and their sons are gone. By mid-2025, that number hit 50,000 cases. These aren't scammers filing frivolous claims. These are tens of thousands of families being systematically denied what they're owed, forced to hire lawyers and battle the very system that sent their loved ones to die. And one of the biggest reasons behind this scam is poverty. Russia's official poverty rate dropped from 11.3% in 2014 to 7.2% in 2024. Sounds like progress, right? Except economists weren't celebrating. They know this decline has nothing to do with the actual economic development. It's military salaries pushing families above poverty thresholds, death compensation creating one-time cash windfalls, and wartime manufacturing jobs. Russia is measuring economic success through money that comes from mass casualties. The labor market is completely distorted now. Every corner of Russia's civilian economy faces severe worker shortages because military salaries are so high that people rationally choose war over regular jobs. Bloomberg reported in 2024 that regional authorities could only fill 2/3 of recruitment quotas despite massive bonuses. Putin had to raise federal signing bonuses to 400,000 rubles just to keep people enlisting. And all of this cash flooding into poorer regions is fueling inflation. Russia's central bank raised interest rates above 20% in 2024, partly to combat it. This creates a vicious cycle. Inflation eats away at both military pay and death compensation, forcing the government to offer even larger payments to maintain recruitment. Economist Marlene Laurel talks about a new war middle class. People earning over 100,000 rubles monthly doubled from 5.7% in 2021 to 10% in 2023. But this middle class is built entirely on war income. If the war ends, many regions would face economic collapse. Here's the darkest calculation. A 2019 study found Russians valued their own lives between 2.4 and 13.3 million rubles, depending on income. So the 14.5 million ruble death compensation package exceeds even the high end. Mathematically, death in military service has become financially rational. Some families are doing this math explicitly. They encourage male relatives to sign military contracts, viewing it as a way out of generational poverty. The economic benefit of a relative's death becomes part of the family calculation. The cash environment has created other problems too. Returning soldiers with injury bonuses become targets. Nikita Kursa received 2.7 million rubles in combat pay and injury compensation. Police stopped him while drunk and, according to him, stole his entire cash savings. But here's something nobody talks about. The regional governments can't actually afford this. Federal payments are one thing, but regional governors are required to provide top-up payments of 1 to 3 million rubles from local budgets. Some regions are on the edge of bankruptcy because of this. In late 2024, the Republic of Yakutia temporarily stopped payments to soldiers and families. They ran out of money. Officials said they couldn't forecast the demand, which is just a polite way of saying casualties were higher than expected. By September of 2025, Russia's regional budgets showed a cumulative deficit of 724.8 billion rubles. The previous year, they had a surplus. This fiscal crisis creates another incentive for regional officials to deny or delay death certification. Every death they don't officially confirm saves the local treasury money. On the other hand, Russian state media covers Black Widow cases very selectively. Russian state media has a very selective way of covering Black Widow cases, and it's worth understanding how the propaganda machine actually works. They pick the most shocking examples, the woman who married 5 soldiers, the most blatant fraud cases, and amplify them everywhere. The goal is simple: generate maximum public outrage, then channel that anger into demands for harsher penalties and stricter laws. Give people someone to hate, someone to blame. But notice what they never talk about. The state media won't ask why regional governments are going bankrupt. They won't investigate why 63,000 soldiers are missing. They definitely won't question whether the massive death payments themselves create these incentives in the first place. Any systemic analysis that might make you question how the war is being conducted? That is off limits. Instead, pro-Kremlin outlets frame this as a betrayal of heroes. They emphasize how fraud disrespects the genuine soldiers' wives, the women honorably supporting their warrior husbands. It becomes about protecting the heroic image of the military family. Some patriotic bloggers take it even further. Some bloggers claim Black Widows might actually be intelligence operatives, extracting military secrets from soldiers before their death. Now it's not just fraud anymore, it's Ukrainian sabotage, part of information warfare against Russia. The scam becomes an enemy plot. Conservative commentators use it as evidence of moral decay. They say it proves society is degrading under Western liberal influence. And they're telling the problem isn't a war economy creating perverse financial incentives. The problem is modern values corrupting traditional Russian women. As investigative pressure mounts and more stories emerge, the question isn't just how long the fraud can continue, but whether the state can survive the consequences of building its war machine on the backs of the forgotten and the dead.